The mansion rose over the hill like a sleeping monster, wrapped in a thin rain that beat against the tall windows with an almost desperate insistence. And from inside, a strangled scream tore through the night like a rope that finally snaps. A small, contained cry, the kind of sound only someone makes when they know no one is coming to rescue them. At the entrance, a massive man in a tailored suit, with eyes as cold as industrial steel, slammed the door shut, the impact echoing through the entire corridor. While a few meters away, his wife trembled as she tried to pull her shattered breathing back together, clinging to the wall as if it were the only stable thing left in her world. What no one imagined was that night, before dawn could touch the horizon, a roar of engines would rise from the road, a roar powerful enough to shake even a billionaire accustomed to buying silence. Stay till the end, because this story proves that even the greatest fear kneels before brotherhood. Her name was Lucía Herrera, and those who knew her before her world turned into a marble cage remember that there was a soft light in her, a nearly innocent clarity that slipped out through the edges of her smile, before time and fear slowly extinguished it, like a candle consumed in an airless room. Because her life, which on the surface looked like a triumph surrounded by luxury, had become a golden castle whose bars were not made of iron, but of silence, control, and a kind of loneliness that clings to the skin like a shadow that no longer leaves. She was married to Adrian Cross, a man whose fortune had grown like a beast fed on steel, transport, and money that never saw the light of day. A businessman who walked among politicians and magnates with the perfectly polished smile of a modern king, but who, in private, became a storm without witnesses, a raging wind that never left visible marks, yet destroyed everything it touched on the inside. The mansion where they lived, rising on the hill like a monument to his power, had once been for Lucía a place of admiration, a symbol of the life she believed she had achieved, until it slowly began to transform into her silent prison, a place where every corridor seemed to hear more than it should, where the guards posted at every corner were no longer protection, but silent witnesses of fear, and where the cameras, those cold electric eyes, followed her every move with such precision that it became impossible to forget that her freedom had been taken from her long before she ever admitted it. The immense, arrogant windows towered so high they seemed to mock her longing to escape, reminding her that inside those walls she was not a wife, but a carefully guarded trophy.
Yet what no one knew was that Lucía had been clinging for weeks to a tiny secret more valuable than any jewel in that house. A small card, its edges worn, with a number written by hand in ink nearly faded, handed to her by a stranger outside a supermarket, a man dressed in black leather, his face half hidden by the shadow of his helmet, who didn't say his name or ask for hers, only inclined his head toward her with an almost imperceptible gesture, and murmured a phrase that remained suspended in her memory like a silent pact. "If you ever need help, dial this." That night, when Adrian's hand came crashing down on her again, with the repeated brutality of a hammer that knows no mercy, when humiliation once more blended with the exhaustion of so many years, when she felt for the first time her own soul exhale a deep whisper of sheer weariness, Lucía, her breath shattered, walked toward the phone as if crossing a minefield, her heart pounding in her chest like a desperate drum, and took the card from the pocket of her robe. With trembling fingers, almost unable to obey her, she dialed the number as someone might light a flare in the middle of a dark ocean, hoping that someone, somewhere, would see the flash. And that tiny act, that spark of courage born in the deepest darkness, would ignite a fire that not all the money, not all the power, not all the influence of billionaire Adrian Cross would ever be able to extinguish.
Their leader, Cole Ramirez, picked up the phone with a slowness that felt almost ceremonial, studying it as one might study a freshly loaded gun, not with fear, but with full awareness of its weight. By his side, one of his brothers murmured in a rough voice, the kind that belongs to someone who has seen far too much injustice. He crossed the line again. Cole lifted his gaze, fixing it on the darkness of the hangar, and answered with a firmness that seemed to vibrate in the air. No. He crossed the line years ago. Tonight, he just broke it completely. The engines began to awaken one by one, like steel beasts regaining their breath, filling the space with a thunder that was more than noise. It was a call, a collective oath. That deep, almost spiritual roar made the workshop walls tremble, and for those who heard it, it was not the sound of violence, but of a code that runs deeper than blood. A pact forged on endless highways and in nights where only loyalty keeps a man standing. It was the promise that when one of them falls, all of them move forward. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Lucía listened to Adrian's footsteps approaching down the hallway. They were slow, measured, heavy like blocks of concrete, dropping one after another, each step more threatening than the last, each one reminding her that the monster ruling her life did not sleep, did not rest, was never satisfied. Her breathing thinned into a fragile thread. Her pulse became a frantic drum inside her chest. She didn't know if the bikers would arrive in time. She didn't know if she would survive the night. She didn't know if her call had been an act of courage or a death sentence. But in the midst of that terror devouring her from the inside, a tiny flame began to rise within her, warm, stubborn, almost invisible, yet undeniably real. For the first time in years, Lucía did not feel alone. The road stretched out before them like a luminous scar etched by time across the skin of the earth, an endless line that shone beneath the rain as the falling drops turned into small frozen needles, struck the asphalt with a steady rhythm that seemed to mark the pulse of the night. Yet that storm, with all its fury, could not slow for even a second the advance of the group of bikers riding in tight formation, perfectly synchronized, as if each man shared the same heart beating with the same fury. A silent army driven not by senseless violence, but by a deeper purpose, rising from places where the law barely reaches, and where true brotherhood is the only thing that keeps men alive. Up front, Cole raised his arm, not brusquely, but with the calm authority of someone who has carried too much weight on his shoulders for too long, and the entire formation obeyed at once, veering toward the hill where the Cross mansion stood with the arrogance of a fortress built by someone who had come to believe that money could shield him from every consequence. The wind pushed hard, tearing words from their lips and hurling them into the darkness, yet Cole's voice remained firm, cutting through the cold air as he said that tonight they had not come out to fight, that they had not crossed miles under the storm to spill blood or to impose their strength, but to remind the world, and especially the man behind those walls, that human dignity is not a luxury or a favor, but a sacred boundary that no one, no matter how powerful, has the right to cross. The men riding with him responded to his words with a silent acceptance that spoke far louder than any battle cry, tilting their heads just slightly while their faces, hardened by the road, revealed the deep conviction born from accumulated pain, from wounds that never fully healed, from injustices they had witnessed too many times to allow one more. And it was in those moments, as the lights of the mansion began to cut through the cloudy sky like the outline of a castle raised by a modern tyrant, that it became clear nothing would stop them, because what guided them was not ego, nor hatred, but a loyalty so ancient it seemed almost like a vow carved into the soul of each man.
As they drew closer to the main gate, an imposing barrier that seemed eager to intimidate them from afar, the bikers began to shut off their engines, not abruptly or in haste, but one after another, creating a gradual descent from the mechanical roar until the last motorcycle fell silent, and the quiet that remained hanging over the hill became so deep it felt almost physical, as though the entire world had chosen to pause for a moment to witness what was about to unfold. And in that silence, heavy with intention and meaning, the truth became clear even to the night itself. They had not come to hide or to act from the shadows, but to stand tall before the man everyone feared, proving that his kingdom of power and fear was about to confront something that not all his money and influence could buy or stop: the brotherhood of men willing to protect what he had destroyed. Cole stepped down first, letting his boots hit the wet ground with a weight that did not come only from his body, but from the years, from the decisions that had shaped his story, and from the dusty roads where the law turned into a distant rumor, while brotherhood, that intangible force that binds men together when everything else fails, was the only thing keeping alive those who had seen too much and still refused to surrender. He took a moment to adjust his leather vest, a vest that was far from being just a garment, but rather a record of dark nights, endless roads, and fallen brothers whose names still traveled with him in every stitch. And as he did so, he let out an almost imperceptible sigh before speaking with a voice as firm as a rock weathering the storm, declaring that they would do things right, that they would do it with their heads, with honor, with the clarity of those who know that brute force never weighs as much as true justice. As they advanced toward the mansion's main entrance, drenched by a downpour that seemed intent on erasing the world and yet completely unable to extinguish the fire guiding them,
The patches sewn across their backs began to shine with a different intensity, as if the rain and the hill's lights were revealing something much deeper than simple symbols. Stories stitched by hand with threads of memory, losses that had carved invisible scars, promises made between men who had sworn never again to let someone fall into the darkness without at least trying to pull them out. Each patch seemed to throb with its own heartbeat, as if it remembered that tonight they were not there only for Lucía, but for all those who had ever been silenced.
Cole, without stopping or turning around, spoke with a calm that contrasted sharply with the roar of the storm, a calm that only belongs to those who have accepted the risk and move forward anyway. "We wear these colors as armor," he said, and in that sentence there was everything they were, everything they had lost, everything they were willing to face. And then, almost as someone who lets a simple yet powerful truth fall into place, he added, "And whoever wants to carry the spirit of this road, the official Hell's Road store is linked below." The gate began to rise before them, immense, cold, built not only of metal, but of the ego of a man who had used every inch of his wealth to build barriers between himself and the consequences of his actions. And yet, from where the bikers stood, that gate did not command respect, but rather a bitter kind of pity, because they all knew that no door, no matter how huge, reinforced, or luxurious, could stop what was about to happen. Behind that arrogant structure, the billionaire who had bought silence for years was about to discover the most uncomfortable truth of all, that when brotherhood decides to stand up, when men who owe nothing to anyone choose to confront injustice simply because it is the right thing to do, power becomes fragile, small, useless, and collapses as easily as a castle built on wet sand. The air thickened until it felt almost solid, and for the first time in years, the billionaire felt fear climbing up his throat like a rough wire that forced him to swallow, a small, insignificant gesture, yet so revealing that even his guards, those men paid to be his human walls, noticed it without needing to look him straight in the eye. Cole took a step forward, without raising his voice or adopting an aggressive stance, because true authority doesn't need to be displayed, only spoken. And his words fell with a dry, final weight, like a sentence handed down by someone who leaves no room for argument. "She's not alone, not anymore." The guards stepped back immediately, as if they could feel that the current flowing from those men was too powerful to oppose, too dangerous to ignore. And Adrian, unable to understand how it was possible that he, the man who had bought power, influence, and silence for years, was now being pushed backward by a force he could not grasp, took an involuntary, almost clumsy step, trying in vain to hold on to the mask of authority that was beginning to crack. From the floor, Lucía felt something change in the world. Not a sound and not a movement, but a deep vibration, as if her soul recognized that the balance of the night had finally broken, that the terror which had imprisoned her for so long was beginning to peel away like old, dead skin. There was no violence, there were no blows, there was no need to raise a single fist. There was only a simple,
inevitable, devastating truth that fell upon the tyrant like a hammer forged from years of accumulated injustice. Power that buys fear crumbles when it faces men who do not fear losing anything, because they lost everything long ago and still learned how to stand back up.
Adrian Cross was forced to leave the mansion that same night, not amid screams or struggles, but surrounded by a silence so crushing it seemed heavier than any court sentence. A silence composed of the steady, unflinching eyes of the bikers who watched him without needing to lift a hand, and of the shifting gazes of his own guards, men who for years had been paid to serve as his personal wall, and who now, faced with the presence of a true brotherhood, understood that no salary in the world could justify staying at the side of a tyrant when the world finally began to settle its debts. And so, without dignity and without allies, he crossed that threshold like a dethroned king, feeling for the first time on his own skin the fragility of an empire built on lies. The police, the same force that had turned its back so many times, diverting complaints, ignoring calls, pretending nothing happened behind those walls of glass and marble, arrived with a suspiciously perfect punctuality, as if they had been waiting for some unspoken permission, a signal that it was safe to act now that others had done the emotional and moral work they had never dared to assume themselves. They moved with measured, almost timid steps, careful not to cross the invisible line that separated the bikers from the door, fully aware that what had unfolded there was not violence, but justice.
Lucía finally emerged from the house, wrapped in a leather jacket that Cole had placed over her shoulders without uttering a word. A simple gesture, yet so full of meaning that it surrounded her with a warmth that did not come from the garment itself, but from the presence of those who had answered her call without asking for anything in return. She walked slowly, not out of fear, but because she felt that with each step she left behind layers of a past that had imprisoned her for far too long. And when she lifted her gaze, she realized that the rain, that same rain that had accompanied the night like a constant lament, had stopped completely, giving way to a sky slowly turning a soft, timid blue, the kind of blue that appears when a wound stops bleeding and begins at last to close. That dawn was not simply the end of the night. It was the beginning of something new. Some roads lead to redemption, others to memory. And if you want to keep the flame alive, the official Hell's Road store is linked below, where brotherhood continues to exist long after the story ends.
Days later, the hill where the mansion stood no longer looked like a monster. Lucía would sit on the porch, breathing free air for the first time in years, listening to the distant echo of engines coming and going along the highway. Not because she was waiting for the bikers, but because now she understood what they meant. Brotherhood is not about blood or ink. It is about showing up when no one else does. About defending the ones who no longer have the strength to scream. About making giants fall when their shadows grow too large. And every time she heard that distant roar, She smiled. This was just one of the many forgotten legends of the road. If you want to keep traveling through these stories where darkness meets dignity, subscribe to Hell's Road and ride with us into the next story.